Canto 2, Chapter 2, Text 30. And we're continuing to hear from Shukadeva Goswami. He's speaking to Maharaj Parikshit. He's beginning his answer, which continues throughout the whole Srimad Bhagavatam, which is what should we do to prepare for the next life. Maharaj Parikshit just sat down at the Ganges to hear from him because of his cursing, being cursed. And so this is the beginning of Shukadeva Goswami's answer, which is the rest of the whole Bhagavatam is his answer. So, text 30. Sabhuta shukshmendriya sannikarsham Manomayam deva mayam vikaryam Samsadya gatya sahatena yati Vijnana tattvam gunasannirodham Sabhuta sukshmendriya sannikarsham Manomayam deva mayam vikaryam Samsadya gatya sahatena yati Vijnana tattvam gunasannirodham Sabhuta sukshmendriya sannikarsham Manomayam deva mayam vikaryam Samsadya gatya sahatena yati Vijnana tattvam gunasannirodham Sabhuta shukshmendriya sannikarsham Sabhuta shukshmendriya sannikarsham Manomayam deva mayam vikaryam Samsadya gatya sahatena yati Vijnana tattvam gunasannirodham Saha, he the devotee, Bhuta, the gross, Sukshma, and the subtle, Indriya, senses, Sannikarsham, the point of neutralization, Manamayam, the mental plane, Devamayam, in the mode of goodness, Vikaryam, egoism, Samsadya, surpassing, Gatya, by the progress. Saha, along with. Tena, then. Yati, goes. Vijnana, perfect knowledge. Tattvam, truth. Guna, the material modes. Sanirodham, completely suspended. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. The devotee, thus surpassing the gross and the subtle forms of coverings, enters the plane of egoism. In that status, he merges the material modes of nature, ignorance and passion, in this point of neutralization, and thus reaches egoism and goodness. After this, all egoism is merged in the Mahat Tattva, and he comes to the point of pure self-realization. Please repeat. The devotee, thus surpassing the gross and subtle forms of coverings, enters the plane of egoism, and in that status, he merges the material modes of nature, ignorance and passion, in this point of neutralization, and thus reaches egoism and goodness. After this, all egoism is merged in the Mahat Tattva, and he comes to the point of pure self-realization. Purport. Pure self-realization, as we have several times discussed, is the pure consciousness of admitting oneself to be the eternal servitor of the Lord. Thus, one is reinstated in his original position of transcendental loving service to the Lord, as will be clearly explained in the following verse. This stage of rendering transcendental loving service to the Lord without any hopes of emolument from the Lord or any other way can be attained when the material senses are purified and the original pure state of the senses is revived. It is suggested herein that the process of purifying the senses is by the yogic way, namely the gross senses are merged in the mode of ignorance and the subtle senses are merged in the mode of passion. The mind belongs to the mode of goodness, and therefore is called Deva Maya, or godly. Perfect purification of the mind is made possible when one is fixed in the conviction of being the eternal servitor of the Lord. Therefore, simple attainment of goodness is also a material mode. One has to surpass this stage of material goodness and reach the point of purified goodness, or Vasudeva Sattva. This Vasudeva Sattva helps one to enter into the kingdom of God. We may also remember in this connection that the process of gradual emancipation by the devotees in the matter mentioned above, although authoritative, is not viable in the present age because of people's being primarily unaware of yoga practice. The so-called yoga practice by the professional protagonists may be physiologically beneficial, but such small success cannot help one in the attainment of spiritual emancipation, as mentioned above. 5,000 years ago, when the social status of human society was in perfect order, the yoga process mentioned herein was a common affair for everyone, because everyone, and especially the Brahmana and Kshatriya, was trained in the transcendental arts under the care of the spiritual master, far away from home, in the status of brahmacharya. Modern man, however, is incompetent to understand it perfectly. So, that's about half the purport, but I'm going to speak on the first half and then then get back to the second half, because I'd like to kind of section it off like that. So here we're hearing about this process of getting close to the perfect stage of consciousness. So, and this is the technical details of that perfectional stage. This is also, as Srila Prabhupada points out in the purport, this is the yoga process. It's very technical and detailed, this process of elevating the consciousness out of the coverings of the gross and subtle material nature. So this is repeated in many places in our scriptures. In the Bhagavad Gita, there's an introduction to this process of analyzing the gross and subtle material nature. And so the basic principle is that we're eternal souls, and then we have this material covering, and the process of being freed from the material covering and attaining our pure consciousness is what's being described here in a detailed way. Whereas because we're so fortunately connected to the process of bhakti, we don't focus so much on this. This is technically called part of the yoga process, and also analyzing the material modes, the material nature and the material coverings is called Sankhya yoga. So it breaks down scientifically everything we can observe, and this is introduced in the Bhagavad Gita, and everything we can observe is called kshetra, the field of activities, and it's broken down into gross and subtle. And this is also explained soon in the Bhagavatam too, in the reverse order. Here we're hearing about the yogi who gets removed from these coverings, from gross to subtle. But in the next couple of chapters of the Bhagavatam, it explains the origins, how the creation from Lord Brahma, he creates from subtle to gross. So it starts from the unmanifested material nature, and then egoism, this principle of misidentification of the self, ahankara, and then mixes with the mode of goodness, and the mind comes about, and then intelligence, and then then that's the subtle. So there's this mind, intelligence, and ego, which is this subtle covering, and then there's this manifests the gross material energy, which is the 5 great, what are they called? Elements? 5 great elements. And then this creates like a group of 5s. They all kind of go together. So there's the 5 great elements, which are earth, water, fire, air, and ether. And they relate with our 5 senses. So we have 5, they're called knowledge acquiring senses in the Bhagavad Gita. So this Sankhya very analytically describes everything that we can observe. This is one of the things I found most fascinating about the Bhagavad Gita, how detailed it was. So here we're hearing about this process, how to become freed from it, and I'm just trying to draw some references to explain this. So in this verse, it says that the devotee is surpassing the gross and subtle forms of coverings. So So like I said, the 5 great elements relate with our 5 senses, like the sight, the smell, the taste, the touch, the hearing, and they coincide with the 5 elements. And then there's the senses that we have, and then there's the objects of the senses. Does this make sense? We've all heard this a little bit before. Yeah.
But how do they relate?
How do they relate? That's see if I can remember. So we have these senses, and they're related with these elements. And so the most gross one is earth, and it's explained that the earth is related with the sense of smell. And I kind of know these things theoretically, but it's a bit hard for me to fully understand. But so I can repeat what I've heard. So the earth is somehow related with the sense of smell. It's the most gross element. Gross, not like in the sense of like disgusting or gross, but like gross in the sense of like tangible. This earth is the most gross element. And then there's water, which is related with the sense of taste, and that's why the tongue, there's water on the tongue, and it's interrelated with this ability to taste. And earth, water, fire. Then there's fire, and then fire is related with the sense of sight. So without the sun, everything is dark. So we can't see anything without the sun. Illuminating, bringing light to the universe, and then we can see forms. Earth, water, fire, air. Air is touch. Air is touch. So there's subtle. There's very even in our skin. There's like it's described. I'm pretty sure. I can't remember where I've heard it, but there's like pockets of air or very small air molecules that like enable it. So actually our sense of touch isn't necessarily nothing actually touches itself, but there's subtle air in between it. Something like that. And this sense of touch is very intertwined with this air, and we can, when we like wave our hand or we feel the wind, you can feel like this sense of touch is there just within the air element. And then there's ether, and that's related with sound and hearing. And that's the most subtle of the gross elements, and that's why hearing is really powerful also with the mantra and everything like that. And communication with the voice and hearing is a very powerful means of communication. So, and so the contact, like we have the 5 senses, and then they contact the sense objects, which relate with these 5 elements, and the enjoyment of these sense objects is the main process of material nature. But the yogi is trying to remove himself from these senses and sense objects and the desire to enjoy them. I was sitting in a yoga class yesterday, actually, and at the end of the yoga classes, it's very common now. I'm not sure where this came about, but the culture is that at the end you do this asana called Shivasana, and you sit and you rest, basically. And this is like the most meditative time in the yoga practice. And you basically, like, they usually guide you through a meditation. And yesterday one of them was saying, one of the yoga teachers was saying, let go of your tongue, let go of the stress in your body, let go of your tongue. Something like that, along those words. And I was thinking, because I was meditating on this verse, so I was like, this is similar to this concept of Bhagavatam. In the previous verse, it's saying the devotee surpasses the subtle objects of different senses, like aroma by smelling, the palate by tasting. So this process of becoming freed of the gross coverings That's this process of yoga. But to just, like Prabhupada's explaining that in the Bhagavatam, this is referring to a very advanced stage of yoga where this is a permanent thing. These yogis are surpassing it not just for a few minutes, but permanently going beyond these coverings. And it's explained, Srila Prabhupada explains it as he frequently does, that this mechanical process of yoga, or Ashtanga yoga, it's not possible to actually go beyond the sense objects and the subtle coverings in this age of Kali. So it is, Prabhupada says here, it is an authoritative process, this process of mechanically controlling the mind and senses and gradually purifying yourself of the senses and the sense objects, and then the subtle coverings as well. But it's not actually possible to do in the age of Kali because of the circumstances. There's no training from the beginning of life, and there's so much distraction. The lower modes of nature are so predominant that to attain these, Prabhupada says here that the yoga practice is physiologically beneficial, but it cannot help one in the attainment of spiritual emancipation in this age. So I do yoga practice to stay healthy on a regular basis, just to relieve stress in the body and maintain some mode of goodness, relax the mind. It's physiologically beneficial, as Prabhupada says, but to actually attain the perfection of spiritual life, that's not why I go to the yoga class. So that's why Prabhupada goes on to explain in the rest of the purport the importance of bhakti, especially in this age of Kali. So, but it is an authorized process and it's a very detailed description of a living entity closing all the gates of the body and going beyond the subtle coverings that cover the soul. It's described many times throughout the Bhagavatam when devotees they come towards the end of their life and then they go to the forest and they engage in this type of process actually. Not in this age, but it's described several devotees in previous ages throughout the Bhagavatam. They go into this state of meditation on the Supreme Lord, and then it's described how this language of merging the senses into the modes of nature and allowing merging the mind into the mode of goodness, and it's like a process of closing up shop, basically. Like the yogi closes down all the activities of the subtle and gross body, and then what's left is they're left in this state of pure self-realization, and they go through it step by step. It's described in the Bhagavatam a few times. Well, one time in the first canto, Narada Muni explains how when Dhritarashtra he left home and he started engaging in this process. I can read a little bit about it. So it says here, this is Bhagavatam 1:13-53. It says, on the banks of the Sapta Strota, Dhritarashtra is now engaged in the beginning Ashtanga Yoga. By bathing 3 times daily, in the morning, noon, and evening, by performing the Agnihotra sacrifice with fire, and by drinking only water, This helps one control the mind and the senses and frees one completely from thoughts of familial affection. One who has controlled the sitting postures, the yogic asanas, and the breathing process can turn the senses towards the absolute personality of Godhead and thus become immune to the contamination of the modes of material nature, namely mundane goodness, passion, and ignorance. Dhritarashtra will have to amalgamate his pure identity with intelligence and then merge into the Supreme Being with knowledge of his qualitative oneness as a living entity with the Supreme Brahman. Being freed from the blocked sky, he will have to rise to the spiritual sky. He will have to suspend all the actions of the senses, even from the outside, and will have to be impervious to interactions of the senses, which are influenced by the modes of material nature. After renouncing all material duties, he must become immovably established beyond all sources of hindrance on the path. He will quit his body most probably on the 5th day from today, and his body will turn to ashes. While outside observing her husband, who will burn in the fire of mystic yoga, along with his thatched cottage, his chaste wife will enter the fire with rapt attention. So this is in the section of the Bhagavatam where Vidura, he comes back to the kingdom after the battle of Kurukshetra, and then he instructs Dhritarashtra to leave the kingdom and go to the forest to engage in this process of self-realization. And Narada Muni is explaining this to Yudhisthira Maharaj what Dhritarashtra is doing. He's engaging in Ashtanga Yoga in the forest. So this is an authorized process that devotees do, but it's just not suitable for this age. But it's explained that they go sit and then they merge all these material and subtle elements back into their source. It's like an internal voyage. It's like an internal journey towards the pure state of consciousness. So it's not like they're affecting the whole universe, but they're not merging the whole like material energy together back into the Mahatattva. But for them, in their consciousness, they're going beyond these senses and sense objects. They're going beyond the modes of goodness. They're going beyond the mind and the intelligence and beyond the ego. So within themselves, they're merging these things together and they're transcending it and going back to the point of spiritual realization, but to the level of the soul, going beyond the subtle and gross coverings within themselves. And then at that point, it's described that Dhritarashtra's body, after he attained that state, it just burst into flames, and the whole thatched cottage went into flames, and he attained, it's explained he went back to Godhead from there. And his wife followed him, which was a very intense custom of that time. His wife is named Gandhari. She's very famous in her own right as an ascetic, and able to perform many austerities. And so she followed her husband. But from the outside, it's just Dhritarashtra was in meditation, and then all of a sudden, boom, his body went into flames. But on the inside, this is what was happening. He was merging the gross and the subtle coverings back into themselves. He was transcending the material nature. So, what do we have to do about this? It's described in the rest of the purport that we have the mercy of Lord Chaitanya. So we're not instructed to engage in Ashtanga Yoga, but the process is very similar. In the perfectional stage, there is still the experience of the step-by-step going beyond the subtle and gross coverings. But how we do that is different because we have the process of bhakti. So that's what Srila Prabhupada explains in the rest of the purport, that simply by engaging in the process of hearing and chanting specifically, he repeats it several times, And then Srila Prabhupada explains that the analogy that Lord Chaitanya uses as the Bhakti creeper analogy that Lord Chaitanya uses, he explains that the Bhakti is like a plant in the heart, and the seed comes, and then you water it. You water that seed by hearing and chanting, and then by hearing and chanting, you go through the subtle and gross coverings. You go through the Brahma Jyoti, and you enter into the spiritual world, and eventually, by following the process of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we go to the topmost planet in Vaikuntha, which is Goloka Vrindavan. So we have this topmost practice. Beyond this process of Ashtanga Yoga is the Bhakti process. And Srila Prabhupada explains here, he says, the first and foremost point is that one must understand the prime importance of Bhakti Yoga. The living beings in different species of life are undergoing different terms of engagement according to their fruitive actions and reactions. But in the execution of different activities, one who secures some resources in Bhakti Yoga can understand the importance of service to the Lord through the causeless mercy of the Lord, as well as that of the spiritual master. A sincere soul is helped by the Lord through meeting a bona fide spiritual master, the representative of the Lord. By the instruction of the spiritual master, one gets the seed of Bhakti Yoga. Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu recommends that the devotee sow the seed of Bhakti Yoga in his heart and nurture it by the watering of hearing and chanting the holy name, fame, etc. of the Lord. The simple process of offenseless chanting and hearing the holy name of the Lord will gradually promote one very soon to the stage of emancipation. So this is the process that we're following, and although we might not be completely aware of it, actually, even in this life, while we're engaging in our service, while we're engaging in hearing and chanting, we're actually gradually going beyond these subtle and gross coverings. So we don't have to wait until the end of our life to engage in severe austerities and meditation to go beyond these material coverings. Actually, by engaging in the process of Krishna consciousness, we automatically go beyond these coverings. And the bhakti process is elaborated by Srila Rupa Goswami in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, the Nectar of Devotion. And a lot of the prescriptions in that text we do every day in the morning program. So by following the morning program given to us by Srila Prabhupada, we're definitely advancing in this process of Bhakti Yoga. And so just while at any age, at any time, we can go beyond these gross and subtle forms. That's the cultivation, going beyond the coverings and getting back to our original consciousness, the spiritual consciousness of the soul. So we don't have to wait. We don't have to perform austerities, severe austerities in the forest. We don't have to follow this process, but we do have to sincerely follow the process of bhakti, and attentively hearing and chanting is prescribed by Srila Prabhupada in the purport here. That's the watering of the bhakti seed is by continuous and attentive hearing and chanting about Krishna, chanting obviously the Maha Mantra and reading the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam. So the fact that this process of hearing and chanting is more potent than any other form of spiritual realization is given in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. There's a story of Haridas Thakur. He was explaining the glories of the holy name, and he said that just the shadow of the holy name is enough to give liberation. And there was a Brahmana in the association, and he got very upset with Haridas Thakur, and he said he got offended for some reason. He said this liberation, this becoming free from subtle and gross coverings is so high. How can you say that just by the shadow of the holy name you can attain freedom from these things? You can attain moksha. And he was so upset with him. He said that if that's not true, then I will rip off your nose. He said this to Haridas Thakur. And Haridas Thakur was surprised, obviously because Haridas Thakur is the Namacharya, which described the different devotees in Lord Chaitanya's pastimes. They have these different positions, like Rupa Goswami is in charge of the Bhakti process, the Abhideya Acharya. And Haridas Thakur, he is the Namacharya, so he is the teacher of chanting of the holy name. Particularly, Lord Chaitanya, he uses his devotees to teach specific lessons. And so Haridas Thakur was surprised that this Brahmana was confused, and he said, I'll rip off my own nose if it's not the case. And then he walked away, and all the devotees in the association were very frustrated that this person that came offended Haridas Thakur. But Haridas Thakur goes on to explain that liberation, this freedom, is just a byproduct of chanting the holy name. Chanting the pure holy name, it's liberation from the material modes, which is, from the perspective of a Brahmana, it's a very elevated thing. But the chanting of the holy names gives pure love for Krishna in the mood of Vrindavan. That's where Haridas Thakur is a firm follower of Lord Chaitanya. So liberation is really nothing from this point of view. It's from the material point of view, liberation is very high, but from the view of Krishna Bhakti, liberation is very low. So so he goes on to explain that to the assembly of devotees. And there's a verse in the Brahma Samhita that explains it really nicely here, that how the process of bhakti is superior to these other processes. This is text 34 of the Brahma Samhita. So it says, I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord. Only the tip of the toe of whose lotus feet is approached by the yogis who aspire after the transcendental and betake themselves to pranayama by drilling the respiration, or by the Gyanis who try to find out the non-differentiated Brahman by the process of elimination of the mundane, extending over thousands of millions of years. So it's explained here by Lord Brahma that only the tip of the toe of the lotus feet of the Lord is approached by the yogi after thousands of millions of years of drilling the respiration through pranayama. Thousands of millions of years. But the Lord, and then it's the Gyanis, they try to find out the non-differentiated Brahman by the process of elimination of the mundane. So that's similar to like what I was beginning, when I was beginning the class, I was speaking about analyzing the material energy, the Sankhya Yoga process, analyzing the field of activities. There's the senses and the sense objects, the mind, intelligence, and ego. The Gyanis are very much absorbed in this analyzing and analyzing the difference between the soul from this material field of activities. And this verse in the Brahma Samhita explains that you can do that for thousands and millions of years, but you can only start to approach the tip of the toe of the Supreme Lord. And we know that actually from the Bhagavad Gita, just by beginning the process of bhakti, we can approach the Supreme Lord very quickly, especially in the current times with the mercy of Lord Chaitanya. So I spoke about this surpassing the gross and subtle forms of material energy, how this is done by the devotees in the Bhagavatam. They go beyond these coverings through, at the end of their lives, they go on into this internal journey, this internal state of transcending the material coverings. And then I explained how bhakti is the easiest way to do that, and that because we have the mercy of Lord Chaitanya, we can actually go beyond these things even without performing severe austerities, by engaging in the process that Srila Prabhupada has given us, by giving ourselves to the movement, by staying absorbed in service, and also by attentive hearing and chanting. We go beyond these gross and subtle forms. We basically step over it without the same level of severe austerities. So we have this great fortune. We hardly know what we're doing, really, in my own experience. Hardly know what we're doing, but we're doing it by engaging in the process of sadhana bhakti. We're advancing in this process. We're getting freed from the subtle and gross coverings of the material energy, and so this is due to the glory of our previous acharyas and the process of bhakti and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who's kindly descended in the age of Kali. So yeah, please take advantage. Keep up the good work. Keep continuing to hear and chant about Krishna and engage in this process of sadhana bhakti. And yeah, I'm sure that we will all go beyond all these things, these coverings, if we keep it up. Thank you for your attention. If there's any comments or questions, and any feedback, yeah.
It's in relation to what you said in the beginning, how Brahma creates the ego and the mind and everything. But I'm reading the third canto, in which is called Talks to Maitreya, talks between Maitreya and Vidura. And he says how all those elements are already created by Vishnu and Mahatma. So they're just there. All those elements are already there. So I was just wondering if you could explain the contradiction. Is it like the ego? Because it's something that fascinates me, the creation, and I was wondering how does it work? If Brahman creates the ego and the mind and the intelligence and all the senses, or they are already created in the Mahatattva by Lord Krishna. And then, in a subtle way, that's what I read. In a subtle way, they are in the Mahatattva.
Yeah.
Brahma.
Well, it's explained that there's two creations. There's like the primary creation, and then there's the secondary creation, like sarga and visarga. So, yeah, from what you're explaining, these things are already there, and Brahma is like, so ultimately Krishna, everything comes from Krishna, and then Brahma is a potency of Krishna. He is also a guna avatar too, so he carries out the functions, and I'm not quite aware of the specific details off the top of my head about like what specifically Lord Brahma does, or even to say it another way, what Krishna does through Lord Brahma, or what he does himself. I'm not so. I need to, memorize the details and study the details. But
Krishna is Vishnu, right? It's not Krishna.
Right, Vishnu. Yeah, Vishnu is an expansion of Krishna. No, Krishna's in Goloka Vrindavan. So. But I mean, many times Srila Prabhupada uses the names interchangeably. But yeah, when you get down to details, it's good to understand. But yeah, it's a good point what you're saying. So what is it that you exactly said? Because you can share it more than me.
Because you mentioned how Brahma created the ego and the mind, and you said that right at the beginning of the class.
Yeah.
But it just coincides with the fact that I was reading just this morning how in the talks between Maitreya and Buddha, how actually all that is already created in Mahaprabhupada. So I was just wondering, this is something that fascinates me. Some people may say, oh, just a bit of chaos, you know. But for me, it's important to understand. So is Vishnu already created all those elements, you know, like the earth, the fire, and everything? They're already there, and then Brahma puts them together, or is it Brahma who creates everything?
I think they're all there in the unmanifest form, and the material nature is also eternal too. And Lord Brahma is just a post, so the Brahma comes in and puts together what's already there, and then it happens over and over again. So yeah, there must be an eternal aspect of the existence.
And then another question is that you were mentioning how Vidura goes to the palace of Dhritarashtra, and you were mentioning how at that point Dhritarashtra was already in meditation, in practicing Ashtanga Yoga, or?
No, he was in the kingdom, still living off of the Pandavas, and he instructed him to leave the kingdom and then go, and that's when he engaged in the process of Ashtanga Yoga. After Vidura did it, and Narada Muni is the one who was telling Yudhishthira what was happening, because Yudhishthira came out and he realized that his uncles and his aunt were gone, and he was wondering, and then Narada Muni appeared and told him that Dhritarashtra is in the forest and he's engaging in Ashtanga Yoga and he's going to leave the world in 5 days. Very specific.
So that's the bit I'm trying to understand, because also in the third canto, actually Vidura goes to the palace and Duryodhana said, who's asking him to come here and talk, and Dhritarashtra was there. And he said, just throw him out, you know.
Oh, yeah.
He spies on the interest of the enemy, the Pandavas. So I was just wondering, just trying to understand how, so in this second canto, we're saying that actually Vidura comes and, you know, he instructs to Dhritarashtra to leave. But then on the third canto, we see that actually Dhritarashtra is still there. And then Vidura comes to tell him to leave.
Well, the Bhagavatam isn't in chronological order of the story of the Bhagavatam. Of the story of the Mahabharata. It goes back and forth, and it's not a chronological, not chronologically in line with that story.
So you mean it may have happened the same thing in the same moment, like before Dhritarashtra decides to leave?
Well, when Dhritarashtra left home, and Vidura came back again, but before he came back, he left and came back again at that time, and Duryodhana was there, and it was that was before, because when Dhritarashtra instructed Vidura instructed Dhritarashtra, this is after the battle of Kurukshetra. Duryodhana was dead already, and this is the Pandavas had the kingdom already, and Yudhishthira was enthroned on the throne.
So when Duryodhana says to Vidura, leave the palace.
That was a different time.
Leave the palace. So he goes and then comes back and instructs.
Yeah, after the battle of Kurukshetra. Yeah, all right. Good questions. Anything else? No. All right. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Gaur Premanand.